At 7:37 in the morning, on a Monday that was supposed to be the first day of school, the ground beneath southern Mindanao snapped, not gradually, not with warning. In under 30 seconds, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake, the most powerful to strike the Philippines in half a century, tore through the Sarangani coast and radiated outward at the speed of sound. In General Santos City, a port city of 722,000 people, pickup trucks lurched sideways on the road. Hospital ceilings came down. A Jollibee restaurant on Penditon Avenue, a building people had walked past every single day, folded into rubble. A regional disaster official later told the Associated Press that he could hardly stand and keep his balance while simply walking out of his house. That was in Davao, more than 100 kilometers from the epicenter. By the time the shaking stopped, 77 people were confirmed dead. Over 1,300 were injured. 31 were missing. More than 87,000 homes had been damaged or destroyed across Mindanao. A single landslide in the mountains of Jose Abad Santos killed 13 villagers in a matter of seconds. And somewhere along 100 kilometers of southern coastline, something had happened that geologists would spend weeks trying to fully document. The land itself had risen, in some places up to 2 meters. The coastline had shifted, physically moved up to 200 meters seaward overnight, exposing coral reefs that had been underwater for centuries. And here is the part that keeps scientists up at night. This was not the fault system they were most afraid of. The Philippines is not merely an earthquake-prone country. It is one of the most tectonically complex places on Earth, a 7,100-island archipelago that sits at the collision point of at least 5 major tectonic plates, threaded with more than a dozen active fault systems, and surrounded by 6 separate oceanic trenches, each one capable of generating a magnitude 8.2 earthquake. The country sits inside the Pacific Ring of Fire, which accounts for approximately 81% of the world's largest seismic events. On average, the Philippines experiences around 20 significant earthquakes every single year. It is not a question of if the next major earthquake will strike. It is only a question of where and how populated that place will be when it does. To understand what happened on June 8th, you need to understand the Cotabato Trench. This oceanic trench runs along the southwestern coast of Mindanao, stretching more than 300 kilometers beneath the Celebes Sea. At its northern end, tectonic plates are converging at a rate of 100 millimeters per year. That is the width of an adult hand, pressing inward, relentlessly, every single year. The trench was formed when the oceanic crust of the Sunda Plate began subducting beneath the Philippines' mobile belt, a process that began during the late Miocene epoch, millions of years before the first human being ever walked these islands. This is not a new fault. It is ancient, compressed, and loaded. The Cotabato Trench has a documented history of catastrophic rupture. In 1918, a magnitude 8.3 earthquake along the connected Celebes Sea system generated a tsunami that devastated coastal communities across the southern Philippines. And in 1976, the event that haunts Philippine seismology to this day, a magnitude 8.0 earthquake along the northern section of the Cotabato Trench, sent a tsunami into the Moro Gulf that killed an estimated 8,000 people in a single night. That event, in terms of loss of life, remains the deadliest natural disaster in Philippine history. The June 8th earthquake was the same system, the same trench, 50 years later. 5LCS, the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, had not been entirely surprised. In January of this year, 5 months before the main shock, a swarm of smaller earthquakes rattled Sultan Kudarat province, magnitudes ranging from 1.4 to 5.2. Schools and government offices were temporarily closed. FIVOLCs logged and monitored each event. What those events were, scientists now confirm, were foreshocks. Early this year, we recorded continuous earthquakes of lesser magnitude within that area, FIVOLC's director Robinson Giorgio said after the main shock. Those were foreshocks related to this magnitude 7.8 because they were generated by the same source, the Cotabato Trench. The foreshocks had been speaking. The question, as always in seismology, was whether anyone could hear what they were saying before the rupture came. At 7:37 a.m. on June 8th, the rupture came. The earthquake's epicenter was located 32 kilometers west of Masim, Sarangani, at a depth of approximately 33 to 57 kilometers, deep enough to prevent immediate surface rupture, but shallow enough to generate extremely violent ground shaking across a wide area. Within seconds, 138 aftershocks began registering on the Fivolk's seismic network. The largest of those aftershocks measured magnitude 6.7, arriving within the first hour. Another measured 6.5. For the communities still standing in the aftermath of the main shock, the ground never fully stopped moving. The tsunami threat materialized almost immediately. Fivolk's issued a destructive tsunami warning, the highest tier for 9 provinces spanning the southern Philippines. The Pacific Tsunami Warning Center activated alerts across Oceania, Southeast Asia, and parts of East Asia. Smaller waves were recorded as far away as southern Japan. In the coastal towns of Kiamba and Masim in Sarangani province, the water arrived. The measured height, approximately 1 meter above normal tide levels. That sounds modest. It is not modest when it is moving at the speed of a freight train into streets full of people who had just survived a magnitude 7.8 earthquake. In one coastal village in Zamboanga del Sur, 6 homes built on stilts over the water were swept away by the combination of ground subsidence and wave surge. In Kiamba, with a population of around 50,000 people, regional disaster officials reported that 80% of coastal residents had already evacuated when the waves arrived. Guided by the natural warning signs that Fivolk's has spent years educating the public to recognize strong shaking, a sudden drop in sea level, and then the sound, a roaring from the sea. In the mountains, the story was different. Landslides came without warning. 68 landslides caused significant damage across southern Mindanao. One in Patulang, Cotabato Santos, measured 15 hectares. Others measured 60 hectares. That is the equivalent of 90 American football fields of earth, suddenly in motion. An entire barangay in southern Mindanao was described in official reports simply as almost completely buried. The Philippine Space Agency later mapped approximately 138 hectares of land affected by landslides scarring across Sarangani and Davao Occidental alone. Now let's slow down and look at the mechanism underneath all of this, because this is where the June 8th earthquake reveals something that goes far beyond the immediate disaster. The Cotabato Trench is what geologists call a megathrust subduction zone. Think of 2 massive tectonic plates, one sliding beneath the other at the rate of 100 millimeters per year. Now imagine that process locking. Instead of sliding smoothly, the plates grip each other, building stress over years, decades, centuries. That stored energy is elastic. It behaves almost like a compressed spring. When the interface finally breaks, it does not release that stress gradually. It releases it all at once in the form of seismic waves that ripple outward through the crust at thousands of meters per second. The 7.8 magnitude we recorded on June 8th represents a rupture area estimated at roughly 70 by 65 kilometers. An underground zone approximately the size of Rhode Island, where the 2 plates suddenly slipped by up to 4.7 meters relative to each other. That is the distance from your shoulder to your fingertip. Except it happened across thousands of square kilometers in less than 30 seconds at depth. Here is the analogy that makes this concrete. Imagine pressing both palms flat against a rough tabletop and pushing them in opposite directions. At first, friction holds. The harder you push, the more energy builds up in your palms, your forearms, your shoulders. When the friction finally breaks, when your hands snap past each other, all of that stored energy releases instantly. That is what happened 33 kilometers beneath the Celebes Sea on June 8th. Except the hands are tectonic plates, the tabletop is the Earth's crust, and the snap sends shock waves through 109 million people's homes. The Cotabato Trench is capable of generating events significantly larger than what struck on June 8th. Fivolk's director Teresito Bacolcol said explicitly, the day after the earthquake, any area along the country's 6 active trenches could experience a magnitude 8.2 earthquake. The strongest recorded on any of these systems remains the 1976 event at 8.1. The The Cotabato Trench has not yet produced its maximum possible rupture in the modern instrumental era. Scientists cannot say when it will, but every year that plates converge at 100 millimeters, every year the stress accumulates, that potential energy grows. And then there is the other fault, the one that keeps disaster planners in Metro Manila awake at night. The West Valley Fault runs approximately 100 kilometers through the eastern metropolitan area of Manila and its surrounding provinces. Unlike the offshore Cotabato Trench, this fault is onshore. It runs directly beneath neighborhoods, directly beneath schools, directly beneath hospitals. It passes through some of the most densely populated urban terrain on Earth. Scientists estimate it is capable of producing a magnitude 7.2 earthquake, and models suggest that such an event could kill more than 33,000 people in Metro Manila alone, injure hundreds of thousands more, and destroy approximately 13% of all residential buildings in the metropolitan area. The last time this fault is believed to have ruptured was in the mid-1600s. That is nearly 400 years of accumulated stress. Following the June 8th earthquake, Philippine disaster planners were explicit. What happened in Mindanao was a preview. The collapsed buildings seen in Mindanao, said Rene Maley, president of the Philippine Disaster Resilience Foundation, are only a small preview of what could happen should a similar earthquake hit Metro Manila. He went further. He described Manila's evacuation routes, primarily north-south roads through congested urban corridors, as wholly inadequate for a major seismic event. He called the big one, the one thing that keeps me up at night. And he said, the country, despite improvements in public awareness, may not be fully prepared for what that fault will eventually do. 13 million people live in Metro Manila. The most densely populated city on Earth sits on top of a fault that has not moved since the 1600s. What Fivolks and the broader scientific community are watching right now is the pattern of aftershocks along the Cotabato Trench. Specifically, whether the June 8th rupture transferred stress to adjacent, previously unloaded fault segments. This is a concept called Coulomb stress transfer. When one section of a fault ruptures, it does not simply release energy and go quiet. It redistributes stress onto neighboring sections of the fault system. In some cases, it brings those segments closer to their own failure threshold. Fivolks has been deploying additional seismographs across Cebu and Bohol, islands on a different fault system, but within regional seismic influence, specifically to monitor for any signs of elevated stress accumulation following the June 8th event. The number that would change everything, another magnitude 7.0 or higher event on the West Valley Fault within the next 3 years. That would suggest the regional stress field has shifted. That would mean Metro Manila's 400-year clock is no longer just a theoretical concern. It would mean the big one is no longer a question of if, it would be a question of how soon. The footage from General Santos City that circulated in the hours after the June 8th earthquake showed something that is both devastating and, to seismologists, chillingly familiar. A city built on a plain, surrounded by mountains, facing the sea, reduced to rubble and ruin in 30 seconds by a fault system that has been building toward this moment for decades. The same footage, with different street signs, has been captured before in 1976, in 2019, in 2023. Each time the trench loads again, each time scientists issue updated warnings, each time the public response follows the same arc: shock, rebuilding, gradual forgetting. The Cotabato Trench does not forget. It does not rebuild. It simply accumulates. Fivolks director Beckel Call, in his public statement following the earthquake, said something that may be the single most important sentence spoken by any official in the aftermath of June 8th. Since it happened in Mindanao, they might think that it will not happen here. That's normalization bias. He was speaking to Filipinos, but the principle applies to every person who has ever watched footage of a distant earthquake and felt, however briefly, relieved that it wasn't them. Subscribe to stay ahead of what's coming.